Week 7 of the 2025 college football season now in the books. As we enter the second full weekend of October, we said that the Week 7 slate in the Big Ten Conference might be the single best weekend of Big Ten football in the history of this league, and it did not disappoint, both with the victories that we saw, the losses that occurred, and the ramifications and implications because of all of the results from the second full Saturday in October of the 2025 college football season. We say hello and welcome to Big Ten Breakdown, a part of the I-80 Club. I am Ben Stevens. Thank you for joining us as we get set on this new week, but of course, recapping and reacting to everything that we saw from the weekend that was within the Big Ten. It is your Week 7 postgame show. And as always, make sure that you are following, you are liking, you are subscribing with all of the great content. Not that this program is producing, but everything across the I-80 Club. That is on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your favorite shows, YouTube if you are watching, and of course, all across social media. If you want all of that great content, advertisement-free, it is patreon.com/I80 Club. That is I80 Club. The Week 7 postgame show. Week 7 within the Big Ten Conference did not disappoint. It delivered statement victories in Eugene, Oregon for a football program in Bloomington, Indiana that is now looking like one of the premier programs within this glorified conference. And a team we expected to probably win the Big Ten crown this year, now looking for a new head coach. That is just a sampling of everything that we saw from the weekend that was. But that is where we begin. Before our 4 down honors, the 4 best things we saw from the weekend that was within the Big Ten, we get to the big monumental news from Sunday. Penn State has fired James Franklin. It is really hard to categorize how we reached this point for the Nittany Lions, for the preseason number 2 team in the country in the AP Top 25, for a team that this year in Happy Valley, in State College, Pennsylvania, had all of the pieces in place, had all of the tools in returning production to finally, at long last, be not just a Big Ten contender or a college football playoff hopeful, but a true national championship quality caliber and contending team. It has been anything but. In maybe the most wild 3-week span in college football that we have seen in recent memory. How did we reach this point? A 3rd consecutive loss for the Nittany Lions. This one inside Beaver Stadium on Saturday afternoon into the evening hours against Northwestern. The Wildcats beating the Nittany Lions 22-21 on Saturday, winning outright as a 21.5-point underdog. The 2nd consecutive weekend that James Franklin and Penn State lost as at least a 3-touchdown favorite. We have most betting data, most odds sample sizes dating back to 1996. So call it the last 3 decades. This is the first time ever a team has lost 2 consecutive games when booked as at least a 20-point favorite. This had to happen, frankly. It is shocking. It is stunning how quickly this all diminished. How quickly the situation in State College deteriorated from a Penn State team that was hosting a top 10 tilt in a whiteout game with an opportunity to beat Oregon just about 16 days ago. From the time you are listening or watching this Big Ten Breakdown Week 7 postgame show to where we are now, fewer than 2.5 weeks, Penn State had the opening lead in overtime. They had that chance to change the outcome and the narrative surrounding this program. Instead, they falter. They look lifeless on a cross-country trip against the UCLA team that entered their game winless. And frankly, they had no resolve and no resilience against Northwestern either. It was as bad as it could be. And this had to be done for Penn State. I am sure it was a difficult decision for new athletic director, not overly new the last few years, but new AD Pat Kraft, who certainly was not there when James Franklin was hired more than a decade ago. This is what is stunning, that it had to happen, and yet it did. Because the writing was on the wall. It was over. It wasn't just a couple of bad losses where big game James and many of the narratives surrounding Penn State, the better part of the last decade in State College, rearing their ugly head again, where it felt like Penn State was going to falter on expectation and not rise to the challenge or the occasion of those significant stages. but dropping the games against UCLA and Northwestern in the fashion that they did, with how abysmal the product looked, with all of the talent and the production and the stars on this Penn State roster, to add Jim Knowles, and yet his defense could not stop Griffin Wildy for Northwestern, to have everything that you did in the 3-year returning starting quarterback in Drew Aller, with the backfield of Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, with the same offensive play caller and Andy Kotelnicki, to add all of the talent in the transfer portal at the wide receiver spot and still see these results. This had to happen. And yet not many people believe that it would right here, right now, because of the value of James Franklin's buyout. Penn State, in dismissing James Franklin, is going to pay Franklin more than $49 million to not be their coach. Nearly $50 million to not be the head coach, not be the leader of Penn State football. That is how drastic and jarring the situation of the last 3 weeks has been for this program in State College. But that goes to show you, Penn State, as an athletic department and as a football program, understood that something had to be done because this could not carry on. And I am sure in those behind-the-scenes conversations, in the conference rooms with the Board of Trustees and the athletic department, and I am sure the man-to-man, one-on-one conversations and talks that James Franklin himself and probably his agents were having with Pat Kraft and the rest of the football program and the rest of the ADs and the decision makers and powers that be in State College, there was probably that sense and sentiment on both sides that maybe the best direction forward for both parties, Penn State football and James Franklin, the individual head coach, were not together. The marriage was over. It was lifeless. It was lackluster. And again, we'll talk about where Penn State goes from here in just a moment. But the buyout value, astounding. Nearly $50 million, more than $49 million in a buyout. The second most expensive buyout in the history of college football, only trailing Jimbo Fisher, who was fired by Texas A&M more than 2 years ago at the end of 2023 to the tune of $76 million. Only 2 buyouts in the history of this sport have exceeded $22 million in worth. James Franklin for more than $49 million and Jimbo Fisher for $76 million. And I wanted to do a little bit of digging, a little bit of research here, because there is no doubt that James Franklin had his limitations as Penn State's coach. We all know the record against AP top 5 and AP top 10 foes as the head man in State College. 1-15 against those top 5 opponents. Now 4-21 after the loss to Oregon against top 10 teams as well. But James Franklin had a lot of success in Happy Valley. His overall record at Penn State, 104-45, including the 3 consecutive losses to Oregon, UCLA, and Northwestern these past 3 weekends. That tipped the win percentage south of 70%, but still .698. It is ridiculous how quickly and how swiftly this situation deteriorated in State College. But there was success. The 2016 Big Ten Championship, a college football playoff berth and a play away in the fourth quarter from a national championship game berth just a season ago. A Big Ten title game appearance last year as well. When you really try to do a sample size of not coaches that maybe had some success and got fired quickly, we could think of Frank Solich at Nebraska in the early 2000s, having to replace the legendary Tom Osborne. You could think of Ed Ogeron leading LSU to maybe the most dominant season of college football in recent memory and a national title in 2019, only to be fired just a few years later. But those guys weren't there for a decade plus. Those guys were not there as the head coach for 10 to 15 years. So when you try to get a recent sense of coaches who were fired by their programs and had been there for more than a decade with consistent success that 115 FBS programs would strive for, would die for, would probably do some things out of the lines to even ever replicate. It is kind of crazy to see this. 2 really come to mind. Mark Richt at Georgia, who was there for 15 years, had a win percentage with the Dogs of .740, but then, of course, could not get Georgia over the hump. Enter Kirby Smart, who in the decade he has been as Athens 2 national championships. Georgia, prior to the national championship in 2021, had not won a national championship in more than 4 decades. And how about in this conference? John Cooper at Ohio State, late 80s, 90s, into 2000. In the years that he was there, his 13 at the helm in Columbus, a .715 win percentage. But who came after John Cooper? Jim Tressel, and all the success, of course, that Ohio State has seen since that time in this millennium. Could that be the case in State College? We'll talk about who is next in just a moment. But I do want to reflect on where the Nittany Lions are here in 2025. The preseason number 2 team in the country, decided by a razor edge with Texas to be the preseason number 1 team in the nation entering 2025. As we shared in our preseason prospectus, the word for Penn State was expectation. Anything short of a national championship game berth should be and would be considered a disappointment in Happy Valley. And we are talking about a preseason number 2 team and a national championship frontrunner that is now 3-3 by the second full weekend of October at the end of week 7, far out of the AP top 25. And of course, some more sombering news for Penn State in the actual game against Northwestern. And we'll give the Cats their flowers in just a bit. But Drew Aller suffering a gruesome lower leg injury late. He is now sidelined for the remainder of this season. Where does Penn State go from here this year? Interim head coach Terry Smith, a guy that was on James Franklin's staff for all 12 seasons with Penn State football. Terry Smith, of course, a former player, a wide receiver for the Nittany Lions in the late 80s. He was the only guy remaining on James Franklin's staff from the original one way back in 2014. He will try to guide Penn State through what will be a very murky and tumultuous time for these kids that have so much talent on the roster that were supposed to be competing for a national championship, now have an interim head coach by the time week 8 rolls around. It is mystifying. Again, to see how bad things are right now in State College, to see how quickly things have gone awry in the last 15 to 16 days, to know where this season is from what it was supposed to be. It is one of the great failures and disappointments in recent memory in college football. So let's talk about more optimistic things, perhaps, for Penn State. Who might be next? Maybe 2 guys in the Big Ten. We start, of course, with the guy that grew up in State College, played his college football at Penn State, and is now the head coach of Nebraska in Matt Rule. He has a close personal and professional relationship with Penn State athletic director in Pat Kraft. The 2 resurrected Temple together. Matt Rule going back to his alma mater, trying to resurrect a Penn State program back to the Pantheon. This is not a team, by the way. They played for a Big Ten championship last year and were a few plays away from a national championship game appearance. It's not like they have won 3 games at most in the last 4 seasons, and a proud program has decayed over a stretch of time. Penn State is going to be all right, but there is going to need to be some damage control by that new head coach immediately, and making sure the talent that is there and those to come to State College will remain. I'm not entirely sure Matt Rule makes this move for reasons I will explain in just a moment. Another name, of course, that was thrown out on Sunday afternoon, Indiana's Curt Cignetti, for all that he has done for IU and how quickly he has done things to take that next step, perhaps to Penn State, to State College, and replicate the immediate success. He could have Penn State playing for a national championship in 2026, of course, for what he has done with the Hoosiers football program. I'm not so sure either of those 2 Big Ten head coaches make their way to State College. And I think it is a reflection, and I think it is an inflection point in college football of this current climate, of this modern era. You do not need to play or go to the premier program as a head coach to make the big bucks or to have the never-ending resources to back you to accomplish all of the things that would be deemed successful. You don't need to do that anymore in this NIL era, where if you have big boosters and rich and deep pockets in your community, whether that's in the Lone Star State, out on the West Coast, on the Eastern Seaboard, or in the Midwest, if you have buy-in from an alumni and fan base, and those donors have a lot of dollars, then you can win anywhere. Look at Indiana for Curt Cignetti. Nebraska has the same in Lincoln with the backing for Matt Rule. The days of having to take that leap to the upper echelon, to finally be crowned as though you were making it, to finally make the big bucks, to get paid $8 to $10 million per year, to have the funding and the resources behind you in school structure and in school financial incentive to compete at the highest level. All of that has changed. All of that is gone. The allure of the premier program isn't necessarily there. You can be premier, you can be a front runner wherever your 2 feet are, as we are seeing before our very eyes in Bloomington, Indiana. One of the great teams in the country right now is Texas Tech. West Texas is not Hollywood. It's not Las Vegas. It's not New York City. Texas Tech, because of Cody Campbell, are doing things that the Red Raiders have been trying to do for years. And they have some of the largest backing ever. There is no need to leave that situation for greener pastures or rosier flowers. I am not so sure that some of these destinations that were once perceived as the greatest spots in this sport, and frankly, the few places that you could compete for national success year over year and make the biggest of bucks, are what they once were. And that's not a shot at Penn State. It is a great athletic department. It is a wonderful college town. It is a proud football program that should be winning national championships. And the next coach will be held to that ceiling and standard. I'm just saying I'm not so sure that for some of those established and sitting head coaches, either in the Big Ten or around the country, it is all that alluring like it once was. That as you make your way up for the coaching ranks from the smaller levels, the group of 5 schools, and now a power conference program, but maybe you could get to the upper echelon, it's not necessarily that same path and track as it once was, even as recently as 5 to 7 years ago in college football. So I'm not sure, although Matt Rule is the natural choice, and of course should be the natural candidate we all think of because of his ties to this program and his success as a program builder, although you could bring up his struggles both at Baylor, Temple, and now Nebraska against AP-ranked foes. I would hear that as well for many of the reasons that James Franklin was having chance to fire him well before the disaster of 2025 and years prior. I'm not so sure Matt Rule is that guy just yet. And I'm not so sure Matt Rule, even if he was the guy and got the bankroll thrown at him from Penn State, that he would make that move to State College. I think a couple of other names that will be in consideration. Matt Campbell at Iowa State will be called because he is always called. Alex Golish and the success he is having out south at South Florida in Tampa should be considered for this job. There's a guy in Ryan Silverfield who continues to have underrated success for a Memphis team that might represent the group of 5 and the American in the CFP this year. There's a lot of really good candidates out there. I'm just not so sure the two that you probably first and foremost think of hailing from the same exact league as those Nittany Lions in Nebraska's Matt Rule and Indiana's Curt Cignetti are the guys that are going to end up as the next head coach of Penn State football. They could, and I would not blame them if they do. I just do not necessarily think that is a shoo-in home run, absolutely going to happen hire for Penn State football, who is going to have their own financial restrictions, of course, in making this move and paying James Franklin nearly $50 million to not be their coach in terms of what they can get next. Penn State ain't poor. They're going to have the money to do it. It's why they made this move when they did. But again, we'll see how the coaching hiring plays out in what is going to be a wild cycle here. Wild cycle in 2025. All right. Of course, that was the big news. It is the biggest news in the sport. It might be the biggest news in the sports world from a weekend that was during football season. So now, as we go through the rest of our post-game show, we do what we do each and every week. Our 4 down honors, the 4 distinct best things that we saw from a weekend that was in the Big Ten Conference. And one of the reasons that Curt Cignetti is very much in the at least name running to be the new head coach of Penn State football is because of what he has done in just over a year and a half in Bloomington with Indiana. And of course, IU gets first down honors for what they did on the road in one of the awesome but difficult atmospheres in this sport, that being Autzen Stadium. First down goes to the Indiana Hoosiers in the biggest win in program history on Saturday afternoon in Eugene as IU beats Oregon 30-20. Biggest win in program history doesn't feel hyperbolic by any means. The first ever road win for IU against a top 5 foe. The second ever win in program history for the Hoosiers against an AP top 5 opponent, in the first since 1967. 2 of the 8 victories that Indiana in its program history holds against top 10 teams have come in the last 3 games against Illinois and against Oregon under Curt Cignetti. And if you want to say, well, the Illini have fallen from the top 10 and even the top 25, so that's not legitimate. There is no arguing what Indiana did to Oregon on Saturday in Autzen. It is the best win of the year to date in college football, all around the country, what Indiana did to Oregon on Saturday. Of course, after Indiana won 11 games last year, first time in program history in 126 years prior, that Indiana, or 125 years prior, that Indiana as a program had gotten to double digits in a single season. They reached the college football playoff. But what was that sticking in the craw for IU? In their 2 games against top 10, top 5 teams, in Ohio State on the road in Columbus, and in the college football playoff game in South Bend against Notre Dame, they fell against the stronger competition. They could beat up on the bad teams, but we still don't believe that Indiana football can really compete with the big guns. So that was the opportunity for Indiana to seize on Saturday, and that's exactly what they did. And that has been the calling card and the message for Curt Cignetti and his program in Bloomington since the end of last season. At Big Ten Media Days in Las Vegas in the middle of July, Curt Cignetti said this in his opening statement, quote, "We have to have the right people on the bus." He understood what that meant, to not settle on your success for last year, but to have, as he described, that burning fire in your belly to only improve and get better year over year, week over week, perhaps day over day. And Indiana has those, quote, right people on the bus right here, right now in Bloomington. When you hold Oregon, one of the most lethal offensive attacks each and every year under Will Stein, but certainly this year, a team that averaged nearly 503 yards per game entering week 7. When Indiana on the road in Autzen holds that team to only 267 yards, they've got the right people on the bus and the right people up front. I say up front, Oregon was tied atop the country in only allowing a single sack in the Ducks' opening 5 games of the year, alongside Navy and Cincinnati. So what did Indiana do? They had 6 sacks and 8 TFLs as a team. Mario Landino is balling out of his mind for this IU side. And when you have Aiden Fisher and Isaiah Jones anchoring your linebacker core, you have one of the most talented and successful defenses in the sport. They also forced Dante Moore into multiple interceptions. He had 2 INTs against IU. He had 1 interception thrown in the previous 5 for the Ducks. And what I thought was maybe more impressive than anything was the response once again from Fernando Mendoza and Indiana, because you saw it in that 4th and final quarter in the most critical juncture on the most significant moments. Mendoza throws the pick 6, right? Taken back against IU, game time. Indiana then goes at 20-all on a 12-play, 75-yard, 6-minute and 19-minute drive to put them ahead for good and seal their first ever road victory against a top 5 team. And that 8-yard touchdown pass to the left pylon and boundary from Mendoza to Elijah Surratt was as pretty as you will see. There was not a push-off. It was the perfect placement, the perfect timing, and Surratt made good. By the way, the man known as Waffle House, because he's always open, was that in Eugene on Saturday. 8 grabs, 121 yards, and that touchdown. I shared I was a little bit concerned about Indiana's offensive line in keeping Mendoza upright. The Hoosiers only allowed a single sack to a really dominant Ducks front and a really good defensive scheme under Tosh Lapoy. But that was how good Indiana was. They had the response. They had the resolve on the road to beat a top 5 team in Oregon. Again, why I think calling Saturday's outcome in the 30-20 win over the Ducks, the biggest win in Indiana football program history, I think it is very much deserving of that honor. I think this was the game to show everybody that Curt Cignetti, his brazen style, 2024 success was not an anomaly. It was not a joke. It was proven correct that sustained success was here to come in Bloomington. And with the investment And a guy by the name of Mark Cuban, who buys into his fellow Pittsburgh native of Curt Cignetti and has invested generously in this football program, I do not believe, whether it's for Penn State or any other glamorous big boy job that opens up in the 2025 coaching cycle, because the carousel is going to spin and it is going to be chaos. I do not believe that Curt Cignetti leaves Bloomington anytime soon for any of those jobs. I believe that he is building a national championship contender in Bloomington. So why try to replicate that and start over from scratch somewhere else when you have it right in front of you in Bloomington, Indiana? In the year 2025, you live in a time where Indiana football is a true and legitimate national championship contender. Count your lucky stars. Indiana now ranked number 3 in the AP poll. It is the highest ever ranking for Indiana football in program history. They are now officially a top 5 team in back-to-back seasons. Both of the seasons coached under Curt Cignetti. Indiana had been in the top 5 of the AP poll twice, 2 years in total, 1945 and 67, prior to Curt Cignetti. He doesn't need to go anywhere else to prove it. He is proving it in Bloomington, Indiana, right before our very eyes and as we speak. Second down honors, the title, Changing the Narrative One Game at a Time. It goes to 2 teams on second down for their performances in Week 7, USC and Nebraska. Let's start with Southern Cal. I was at the game at the LA Memorial Coliseum against number 15 Michigan. There was so much maize and blue in the crowd, pregame, the festivities. It felt like an environment that USC was going to have to take advantage of. And it felt like an environment that in times previous, especially as a Big Ten program in the last year and a half, and some of the weaknesses under Lincoln Riley in his 4+ years or his 3+ years there now as the head coach, where USC had struggled. Not the case on Saturday against Michigan. Changing that narrative one game at a time and beating Michigan at their own game. Beating Michigan in a true Big Ten football style game. Beating Michigan with bully ball and establishing the run and physicality up front for all 60 minutes at the Coliseum. USC beats Michigan 31-13 for the first home victory against a ranked team for Lincoln Riley since November of 2022. Just the second ever ranked victory at home in the Coliseum for USC under Lincoln Riley. And how the Trojans got it done, how the Trojans prevailed, that's the story to me. They held Michigan, one of the best rushing offenses in the sport entering Week 7, averaging better than 237 yards per game, 13th best in the country. USC held Michigan to 109 total rush yards, just 3.5 yards per carry. Michigan on the other side was a top 10 rushing defense, only allowing 77 yards per game. Could USC establish its own run and bring that physical dominance on the offensive side? The answer, a resounding yes. USC had 225 yards, and even losing Wayman Jordan, who has been one of the great running backs in the Big Ten in the country this year, and that's upsetting. He's going to have tightrope surgery on his ankle, set to miss 4 to 6 weeks. But when you have the redshirt freshman and the former walk-on in King Miller perform the way he did for SC, a redshirt freshman from Calabasas, California, attending Calabasas High School, my alma mater, and the football program that I played for, not nearly as well as King Miller did by you, 18 carries for 158 yards and a touchdown in that significant spot against that Michigan defense, as resounding of a win in Big Ten play as USC has had to this point, in the way that they did it, to win that type of Big Ten football game, tremendous. Oh yeah, Mekhi Lemon might be the best wide receiver in college football. If it's not Jeremiah Smith, it's the guy playing for Southern Cal. 9 grabs, 93 yards, in one of the most ridiculous touchdown catches I have ever seen live. I also was worried that USC might not be able to protect Jaden Mayava. Did not allow a sack against Michigan. Just a huge victory for Lincoln Riley and his club. Now back into the AP Top 25, ranked number 20 in the country. So welcome USC next week as they take on Notre Dame under the watchful eye of Touchdown Jesus. This is what USC is going to do to be a true contender for a college football playoff if you are going to get back to that level and be Hollywood cool. And let me tell you, in the LA Memorial Coliseum on Saturday, in person, feeling the energy, feel the vibes, it very much felt like cool USC again. You back up a win against Michigan at home with a really good performance against the Irish on the road. So second down honors is changing the narrative one game at a time. USC first, Nebraska second. Nebraska's rally to beat Maryland 34-31. Maybe not as glamorous as taking down a ranked opponent in your own home ballpark by a lopsided score as what Nebraska maybe did against Maryland in College Park. But again, we are seeing Nebraska in its biggest wins this year change that narrative one game at a time. The Huskers beat the Terps 34-31 in a comeback victory. Nebraska led 10-0 early. They dealt that blow. They led 24-17 at the half. But in the third quarter, Dylan Raiola threw a pick six with 6:40 remaining in that third quarter. Maryland took a 31-24 lead. But right after that touchdown, or I should say right after the pick six, Maryland started to establish itself again. Dylan Raiola throwing 3 interceptions in the game, leading to 17 points for the Terps. But when Nebraska needed to make the plays for a second consecutive week, not always pretty, not the most formidable opponents on the other side, against the Michigan State team that is struggling, and against Maryland, albeit on the road, Nebraska made the plays where in moments prior and in seasons past, the Huskers do not. Nebraska scored on their last 2 drives of the game, an 83-yard, 6-minute and 15-second drive that resulted in a 27-yard field goal, and then a 7-play, 81-yard drive in 2 minutes and 34 seconds that resulted in the game-winning touchdown toss from Dylan Raiola to Dane Key with just over a minute remaining. To have that performance in that spot, for Nebraska to trail and come back and win, is the exact opposite of every joke that you, me, and most college football fans made in the past 5 years, whether it was Scott Frost or early Matt Rule, about how Nebraska in these moments, in a one-score, one-possession game, would do something to you-know-what down their leg or screw it up. But Nebraska this year, against Cincinnati, against Michigan State, and now against Maryland, has won games that in years previous the Huskers would not have. They are now. And I think it's a true testament to year number 3 under Matt Rule. Each of the previous 2 seasons, the Cornhuskers have started 5-1. They have started 5-1 in back-to-back years for the first time since 2013-14. Can they sustain that success? The Huskers ranked in the AP poll in the month of October for the first time since 2016. Last year, after starting 5-1, Nebraska lost 4 consecutive. A bit of a rivalry game, if you will, on Friday night in Minneapolis as nearly a touchdown road favorite against the Golden Gophers for the $5 bits of Broken Chair Trophy, and where Minnesota has dominated the Huskers, 5 straight victories over Nebraska. But can the Huskers again change that narrative one game at a time and continue to put success on top of success on top of success? I believe that they will. So second down honors to changing the narrative one game at a time. All right, this has taken a little bit longer than I expected. I promise there was so much to recap this weekend. We'll be done here in about 10, 15 minutes. Third down honor to Damon Williams Jr. for his individual performance in leading Washington to a 38-19 victory on Friday night in Seattle against Rutgers. Damon Williams Jr. in that game, 21 of 27 through the air, 402 yards, 2 touchdowns, utilizing his legs, 13 carries, 136 rushing yards, and 2 rushing scores. Damon Williams on Friday night, dating back to at least 1995 when offensive stats began getting tracked in full. We have the full sample size of it, so it could be long before 1995, but Damon Williams Jr., the first FBS player in recorded history to put together 400 passing yards, 2 pass touchdowns, at least 135 rushing yards, and 2 rushing scores as well in a single game. That is what he did against Rutgers on Friday. He has been stellar this year. He will continue to be. I believe that Washington should be ranked. They're a 5-1 football team whose only loss is to the number 1 team in the country, who looks all the part of the number 1 team in the country in the reigning national champs. One thing I think will be key for Washington, they allowed more than 500 yards, or nearly 500 yards, I should say, to the Scarlet Knights on Friday night. Quick turnaround for the Huskies. Friday night in Seattle, not all that quick. They have an additional day. But Washington now goes on the road to the Big House in Ann Arbor to take on Michigan. They're a 5.5-point road underdog. It is not a game that Washington has necessarily had success with while in the Big Ten. The road has been a little bit more precarious than the familiar and comfortable setting of Husky Stadium. But if you beat Michigan, I think Washington should already be ranked entering week number 8. If you beat Michigan, Jedd Fisch and the Huskies certainly will be ranked. Now down to fourth down honors. The 4 distinct best things we saw from the weekend that was in the Big Ten. Our fourth and final, the upset kids. Of course, we talked about this game and the outcome and the result already, but more from the Penn State perspective. Penn State losing to Northwestern 22-21, the final nail in the coffin in the dismissal and firing of James Franklin. But I do want to credit what David Braun and the Cats did on Saturday in State College to win outright as a 3-touchdown underdog, because it wasn't necessarily like they won like UCLA won and holding off in the Rose Bowl a week prior. Penn State took a lead, 21-16, with 10 minutes and 50 seconds remaining. Don't forget, UCLA never trailed in Pasadena against Penn State. They let some ground be made up, but they never trailed. Northwestern did in the fourth quarter, and it felt like with fewer than 11 minutes remaining in regulation that, yeah, it was murky, right? And, yeah, man, things are really down bad for these Nittany Lions, but they were going to beat Northwestern. They weren't going to come anywhere close to covering as a 3-touchdown home favorite, but they would beat the Cats. No, because after Penn State took that lead, Northwestern responded right away on the very next possession for the Cats. 12-play, 75-yard touchdown drive, resulting in a Caleb Komolafe, who is having a stellar year for Northwestern touchdown run, and a guy that absolutely gashed the Penn State secondary and Jim Knowles' defense, who, oh, buddy, you're making more than $3 million a year with that much NFL talent on your roster, and you can't contain a guy in Griffin Wilde that just ran all over you, that ran all over them. 7 grabs, 94 yards, a touchdown. Wilde was kind of unguardable in that game for Penn State. And Preston Stone had more passing yards in the game than that of Drew Aller. And again, it's not just the dismissal of James Franklin. That feels like 2025 is only going to be catastrophic for Penn State based on those very lofty preseason expectations. But your heart goes out and it breaks to Drew Aller, who is now out for the remainder of this season. His college career more than likely over because he is out of eligibility unless the NCAA continues to get sued and for some reason a rule changes and Aller can come back. I don't expect that to be the case. But a guy that was considered a Heisman frontrunner entering this year and a potential top 5, top 10 draft pick now has a long road to recovery and trying to build up that NFL draft stock to be a pro quarterback. It's unfortunate, right? And you wish him nothing but the best in that recovery. Drew, we're thinking of you. The redshirt freshman, Ethan Grunkemeyer, takes over as that quarterback for Penn State now. And he will have a difficult first test on the road in Kinnick Stadium at night against Iowa. 13 total pass attempts in his 2 years now for the Nittany Lions, including 11 this season. The upset kids, that's plural. UCLA, man. Something has been found by this interim coaching staff led by Tim Skipper and the new offensive play caller in Jerry Neuheisel. UCLA continues to roll. They don't just win in East Lansing. They blow out the Spartans at Spartan Stadium. 38-13, the victory for the Bruins over MSU as an 8.5-point underdog. Nico Iamaleava has looked fantastic and very much in control of Neuheisel's system. Last week against the Nittany Lions, 3 rushing touchdowns. This past Saturday against Sparty, 180 passing yards and 3 passing scores. UCLA ran for 238 yards against Michigan State. They held MSU on the other side to a total of 253 yards. We are going to talk about the Spartans in just a moment. UCLA's 5 Big Ten wins as a Big Ten program, 4 have come outright as an underdog. Each of these 2 this year as an 8.5 and a 24.5-point underdog. And Jerry Neuheisel and his golden locks and everything that he means to this Bruins football program as a player, his father, and now what he is doing as the play caller, he is deserving all of the praise and the flowers that he is receiving. But let us not forget who is the guy orchestrating it all. Tim Skipper, who has done an incredible job as an interim head coach throughout his career. I think he is making it difficult on Martin Jarman, the athletic director in Westwood, in terms of what that next coaching hire is going to look like. Because Tim Skipper had a very difficult job for a UCLA team that looked like the worst power conference program in all of the country. And they went to the bye when they fired Deshaun Foster after only 3 games. And Skipper told the media, our bye week is not rest up and get better. Our bye week is training camp. Our bye week is a mini fall camp once again to reset the culture of this program. And then we'll focus on Northwestern. They got beat by the Cats on the shores of Lake Michigan, but they held Northwestern scoreless in the second half. Then they go out and they beat Penn State, and then they have to travel to East Lansing in a spot where everybody, myself included, was believing Michigan State would pick up their first conference win of the year, and UCLA thrashed the Spartans, which leads to our next category. We already saw one of the upset kids lead to the dismissal of a head coach in Penn State's James Franklin. Now let's continue to talk some head coaching issues, because UCLA's big upset win in Spartan Stadium also speaks to some of the glaring weaknesses of year number 2 under Jonathan Smith. Hand up, I thought this guy was only going to have stellar success with this Spartans program. That is a proud football program. You might first think Tom Izzo, but maybe you also think Mark Antonio, and everything that this team was and still could be, with a lot of powerful backing and resources as a football team in the Big Ten. The buyout for James Franklin, nearly $50 million. The buyout for Jonathan Smith would be at least $30 million. I'm not so sure Michigan State is going to do that, but they did hire a new AD in Jay Batt, who feels like he is going to make some moves here very quickly. What I am stunned by for Michigan State is how lifeless the offenses look. It is clear Aiden Childs is not healthy. We saw Alessio Milivojevic once again on Saturday against UCLA. But how bad the defense looks under Joe Rossi, who is a guy in this conference that had success at Minnesota. And I thought it was a sensational hire by Jonathan Smith in filling out his coaching staff, bringing Rossi to East Lansing. It has not worked. And so when a coach feels his seat getting incredibly hot and warm, he starts to make some changes. I would not be surprised if at some point this season, maybe as I'm recording this show, Joe Rossi is dismissed as the defensive coordinator for Michigan State just to shake some things up. And it does not get any easier for MSU. A road trip against IU in the old brass spittoon this upcoming Saturday in Bloomington. And then they will host Michigan in what is always a bitter rivalry game. And maybe you can use a rivalry game to kind of be a linchpin to turn things around. But if not, I don't know if Jonathan Smith sees year number 3 in East Lansing. So James Franklin is out. Jonathan Smith could be on his way out the door. And I think the seat is even hotter in Madison, Wisconsin, because Iowa, in the battle for the bowl in the Heartland Trophy game, goes to Camp Randall, shuts out, and blows out Wisconsin. Iowa wins 37-0. It is the second year in a row that Iowa has won the game against the Badgers by at least 30 points. Since the turn of the millennium, the year 2000, 24 games now between the Hawkeyes and the Badgers. Only 2 have been decided by at least a 30-point margin, and both have come in the last 2 years, in 2024 and now in 2025. In the way that Iowa won, with its identity being credible once again on the road, 210 rushing yards as a team, 4 rushing touchdowns. Mark Gronowski did not look great through the air. We'll see how healthy he is, but his 7th rushing touchdown of this season. But Iowa's defense under Phil Parker, holding Wisconsin at just 209 total yards, only 3.5 yards per carry, and a Hawkeyes defense, not the small guys in the secondary, but the big guys up front along the defensive line, picking off Hunter Simmons twice, including an Aaron Graves 35-yard INT return for a touchdown. That speaks to what this team is. That speaks to what the identity has been and will be in Iowa City under Kirk Ferentz consistently. And it wins. And when it wins in a rivalry game against Wisconsin in that fashion, planking the Badgers at home in Madison, I'm not sure there's coming back from that for Luke Fickell. And I thought his opening statement after the game was very clear that it's just not working. And much like we discussed for Penn State and James Franklin, maybe the partnership that we all perceive would work in Madison just simply won't. And it is best for both parties. a proud Wisconsin football program, and Luke Fickell as a head coach to head in different directions. His buyout going to be around $25 million if he is fired at the end of this season. And that opening statement was this from Luke Fickell, quote, "That's as low as it can be. And I apologize. I apologize to our guys, to not be ready, to not have them ready. I'm dumbfounded in a lot of ways, but that's my job. This is a game we have been talking about since January." And that was a theme for the Wisconsin program all off season. We talked about it here. I'm sure you read about it. And then Iowa had some fun with it after the 37-point shutout win. Wisconsin would do 42 push-ups after most of their offseason workouts because of the points allowed to the Hawkeyes in last year's Heartland Trophy game. And to then have that circled on your calendar, and for that to be the performance, and for your head coach to say, "I am dumbfounded in a lot of ways," it's over, man. The writing's on the wall. When it happens, I'm not so sure. But it's not an if, it's a when. And a lot of these programs that have hired these head coaches that are now going to need to make those changes are going to have the financial incentives at a time in college sports when finances are paramount and revenue sharing and everything that is happening in NIL. But strictly for athletic departments, the rev share budget and having to play a large buyout, that is a tough pill to swallow. We've heard a lot about private equity and the Big Ten. Could that cash infusion right away for some of these schools go directly to buying out a fired head coach? Certainly so, I guess. But I also think we are going to start to see a turn. And I saw this from Parker Fleming, who does great work covering college football, that the market will adapt as athletic departments and schools are now, for the first time ever, as of this July, directly responsible for paying players. They do not have the funds they once did when the market was so coach heavy because you could not invest in your talent and in your staff and in your roster. So the coaches made all the monies, $8, $10, $12 million per year, while players got nothing. Well, now $20.5 million of that rev share cap needs to go to football and basketball and other sports across your college campus and athletic department. I wonder if we see some of these large coaching salaries and the buyouts that come from them start to diminish as well. All right, 5 more minutes, I promise, and we are done. This category is called, dude, this late in the show to talk about the number 1 team in the country winning on the road against a top 20 foe. Are you serious? I apologize. There was just so many other things that had to be said, and Ohio State is doing exactly what we expect the number 1 team in the country in the reigning national champions to do. It is what Ohio State did to Illinois on Saturday in Champaign. And our Big Ten breakdown, game of the week, part 2. 34-16 win for the Buckeyes. I don't say this to pat myself on the back or to feel justified. I just have a sense of how games are going to go or what that key matchup is going to be. It's how we break down the games and preview everything for you. And I said number 1 key in this game, how many points could Illinois score? Could they get through their team total? They did. But the key matchup would be Illinois was able to mask some of their defensive woes this year because of the turnover margin. Illinois' defense was actually pretty good against the Buckeyes on Saturday, but the turnover margin went the opposite way, from a +7 entering week 7 to a -3 in the game against Ohio State. Illinois turned it over 3 times. Ohio State took those 3 turnovers and turned it into 3 touchdowns, 21 total points. You cannot have a -3 turnover margin against the number 1 team in the country in the reigning national champs. Ohio State held Illinois to only 47 rushing yards. They sacked Luke Altmaier 4 times. They made Altmaier throw his first interception of the year. Illinois did score the first red zone and rushing touchdown against Ohio State's defense this year. Illinois was the first team to score more than 10 points, or at least 10 points, against Ohio State's defense this year. The Illini even outgained the Buckeyes in total yardage, 295 to 275. The defense really under Aaron Henry was not bad against Ohio State. Julian Sand, effective once again, efficient, but was not explosive, 166 yards and 2 passing touchdowns. But when you have a -3 turnover margin against this Ohio State team, you are never going to be competitive. Ohio State next week is a 4-touchdown road favorite in Madison against Wisconsin. Wisconsin was just planked by Iowa. Will the Badgers be able to put up 8 points, 3 points, 7 points against Ohio State? We shall see. I'm not overly confident that is going to be the case. And now let's get to Illinois. silver lining for this Illini team that lost to the number 1 team in the country, is the number 17 team in the country. I get it, not an overly competitive game by any means, and fell out of the AP top 25. The 2 losses have not looked great for the Illini. There is no mincing words. They were not competitive at home in the biggest game perhaps for Illinois, hosting the number 1 team in the country in a long time. First time as a ranked team, Illinois had hosted the number 1 team since 1950, 3/4 of a century ago. Was not a great performance. Illinois' first top 20 game of the year against Indiana. They lost by 53. I get it. I get the performances have not looked great for the Illini. And if your question, much like it was for me, could Illinois do, after a 10-win season from a year ago, be that upper echelon team in the Big Ten, win 10 games again, and get to the college football playoff? This is not necessarily what you wanted to see in those performances. But the silver lining for the Illini, their 2 losses have now come to the number 1 team in the country, Ohio State, and the number 3 team in the country in Indiana. They are the only Big Ten team, that being the Fighting Illini, to have played 7 games so far in 2025. They are the only Big Ten team, thus, to not have an open weekend, a bye week just yet, and how difficult the schedule was for Illinois. Very front-loaded. They will get a bye. They will rest up. They will fix some defensive issues. They will get healthier. And then their final 5 games of the year, trying to go back-to-back and getting to 10 wins on the road against Washington in Seattle, the final weekend of October. That's going to be a difficult game. There is no doubt about it. But then Rutgers at home, Maryland at home, on the road against Wisconsin, at home against Northwestern. It is very manageable. 4 out of 5 wins, you're a 9-win team. All 5 wins, you are 10-2 once again. And even if we question the legitimacy of the resume, depending on what happens elsewhere around the country, the Illini might not have that marquee win. But a 10-2 Big Ten team is at least going to be in the conversation come late November for a college football playoff spot. So that's the silver lining for the Illini. And last but not least, and by far our longest post-game show that we will ever know and that we will ever see here on Big Ten Breakdown, Minnesota in the nightcap beats Purdue 27-20. Tough one for the Boilers, I think. Despite being on the road in Minneapolis, Purdue led 10-0 early, 17-13 at the break, 20-13 at the start of the fourth quarter. Early in the fourth quarter, Spencer Porath, who has been incredible this year for Purdue, their field goal kicker, misses a 48-yarder. Minnesota, down by 7, scores on the next possession to tie the game. And in the very next play, the ensuing offensive drive, the first play from scrimmage, Ryan Brown is picked off by Corey Parrish, who takes it back for a touchdown. The incredible athlete and playmaker for Minnesota with his first interception of this year and his first career touchdown as a Golden Gopher. The Esco kid on homecoming night, very much at home with a house call. And that first career touchdown gives Minnesota the victory. Purdue had its chance. First and goal late in the fourth from Minnesota's 7-yard line. Second and goal from the 5. A costly holding penalty against the Boilermakers. Ryan Brown unable to make it up. 3 interceptions thrown last night by Purdue, 2 by Brown, 1 resulting in the game-winning touchdown for Corey Parrish, and then 1 from Devin Mockabee. We know that Josh Henson is getting creative in what he is doing. He used Malachi Singleton, the backup quarterback, in many rushing spots, including on the opening drive of the game on a 4th and 2 near midfield, 40-yard touchdown run for Singleton. It is a much better product on the field. But I think one of the issues why this is a tough loss for Purdue, this is one they could have spoiled for Minnesota. And they had it in their grasp. And yet still some of the things of a struggling team that is at the bottom of a conference is the undisciplined nature of turning the football over. 4 in total for Purdue, 1 coming on the final play of the game, doesn't really count. So 3 in full for Purdue, and costly penalties at times that took Purdue out of scoring chances that could have tied or maybe won the game. One thing that's really interesting to me as we talk about Minnesota quickly here, Darius Taylor-Back was involved in the pass game. Not a ton on the ground, only needed 42 yards to get to 2,000. Did not come close. Minnesota as a team, 18 attempts for 30 rushing yards. The last month, the Gophers can't really run it. Minnesota will host Nebraska in the rivalry game, the $5 Bits of Broken Chair Trophy. of course, that we had the last decade. Plus, one of the great things of this conference is all the trophy games that we have, real or not, substantiated or not. Minnesota will host Nebraska on Friday night. Big win for the Gophers. They needed it. They got it. They made the plays when it mattered. The product for Purdue looks so much better, but you're still left wanting more from a truly disciplined team that is making those steps, not just to be competitive or be a thorn in the side, but win a couple of games maybe you are not expected to. Thank you for tuning in to everything we saw here in the Week 6 Big Ten breakdown, Week 7 Big Ten breakdown post-game show. It's been that long. I promise this will be the longest ever post-game show reacting to a weekend that was. We will have here. But there was obviously so much to give you with the dismissal of James Franklin and a full conference slate with all 18 Big Ten schools and 9 total conference games. I hope you enjoyed. We'll be back on Friday morning for our Week 8 preview show. Thanks for being here on Big Ten Breakdown. I'm Ben Stevens.